We're presenting you a Best of the Pigskin Dispatch as we go to the football history headlines for April 7th and discuss some major NFL rules revisions in 1943 and remember a great legend, Tony Dorsett, and his gridiron accomplishments. All this and more coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com, and welcome to the Pig Pen once again for your April 7th football history headlines and birthdays of Hall of Famers edition of the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch podcast. And before we get going, once again, I got another great story, and it happened when I was first married to my wife. I was already a football official, and so I already had the practice and knew a little bit of what was going on with football officiating, and I sort of had my routine and everything. And when we bought our new home, I always got dressed and undressed, unpacked down in our basement. We have a little family room down there. And one day I was upstairs and I heard my wife go down in the basement, and all of a sudden I heard her scream and say, "Hey, wait, what's going on here? This is not right." And so I came running down to see what she was talking about, and she saw these little black pellets all over the place and little black objects. She did not know what they were, and she goes, "What are these things?" And I knew what they were right away, and I told her, I said, "Wow, those look like spider eggs. They're really coming out bad this year." And she, of course, screamed and sort of moved away from them and said, "We got to call an exterminator. We got to do this. We got to do that." And then I was laughing, and she looked at me and said, "Okay, what are they? I know they're not that." Well, if you've ever been on a turf field, the pellets that are on them, I think they're shredded tires or maybe shredded sneakers, some kind of rubber pelletization. They're all black, and they're very magnetic with static electricity that stick to the bottoms of your shoes, your socks, anything low to the ground. They'll statically cling to your person, and of course it's hard to get rid of all of them when you undress at a football game and throw all your gear back into a bag. So when I pull the gear out, all these pellets fell out of it, and I didn't realize it. It was late at night probably when I came home from that football game on a Friday night, and she had noticed it the next morning. Well, she didn't really appreciate me having a little bit of fun with her on that, and from there on in, the rest of my career on field turf, I had to make sure that that was cleaned up, and which I should have done anyway. Okay, now that we've got the football side of your brain working, let's get to your football history headlines for this April 7th, and it all starts off in 1943, and according to a post on the NFL.com, the league adopted several new rules and changes on that 1943 day. First one is a big one. Free substitution became permitted, which meant that players could be substituted more than once during a game. Now think about that. We see free substitution every single play in football, where you have platoons of players sometimes coming on and off, or at least one or two players switching out on different sides. Well, prior to 1943 in the NFL, you were on the field until you were taken out, and then you couldn't return to the game, much like a baseball lineup is. And how uncomfortable and how different a game of football would be with that. That's why you saw two-way players, really happening all the time in football prior to 1943 in the NFL. So the first 23, 24 years were all single platoon systems because players had to stay on the field, even your star quarterbacks. Can you imagine Tom Brady having to stay out there and play defense after having a long offensive drive? Well, we're glad that they changed that in 1943. Really changed a lot of the complexion of the game. But there were other big rules on 1943, April 7th. And one of the other one was that helmets became mandatory on that day. So, prior to that, players could wear a helmet if they wanted to or not in the NFL. I don't think they were, some were still of the leather variety, but I think the plastics were starting to come about at that point in time. Not a lot of face masks and helmets at that time, but those will come up later, and we'll talk about that on a future podcast of your football history headlines. But another significant rule that came on April 7, 1943 was that a 10-game schedule was adopted. Prior to that, teams could play any number of games. It was kind of hard at the end of the season when you'd have some teams playing 12, 14 games, some playing 7. Just kind of wasn't really a fair and level playing field for determining who would go into the postseason. So they adopted a standard 10-game schedule in the NFL at that point. So some big rule revisions that happened in 1943 on us April 7th anniversary of that. So we're thankful for that. Now let's go to some birthdays of Hall of Famers. And your first one for April 7th took place in 1899 in LaPorte, Indiana. The Stellar Center from 1917 to 1920 at Washington and Jefferson, and then again in 1921 through 1924 seasons for the Army team. Edgar Garbish arrived in this life to claim his date of birth. Edgar was an All-American in 1922 at the center position, and in 1924 from the position of guard, according to the National Football Foundation. Garbish's skill set did not stop there. The Gridirons. He was a place kicker and a drop kicker, showing these talents off when he place kicked a 47-yard field goal to give Army a victory over Navy, 17-14 in 1922. Then, in 1924, he drop-kicked 4 field goals as Army beat Navy again, only this time 12-0, so all the points came from his field goals. As he has unparalleled accomplishment of having to face Notre Dame 5 times as an opponent, not leaving the field for even 1 second in those 5 games because he was a two-way player, and all of those 5 tilts against the Irish. Once with W&J, and 4 contests as a member of the Army Cadets. Edgar Garbish received the great honor of being selected as inclusion into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1954. Edgar was well decorated, serving in the Army Corps of Engineers for 2 decades and serving on many organizational boards throughout his life, but most notably on the Gridiron associated ones of being a trustee of the Pop Warner Little Scholars, as well as the vice president of the National Football Foundation. April 7th, 1954, Rochester, Pennsylvania. The great University of Pittsburgh halfback from 1973 to 1976, Tony Dorsett was born. The National Football Foundation shares that Tony set a pit record by becoming an All-American halfback 3 times. As a freshman in the 1973 season, he set an NCAA single-game record of 265 yards on the ground against Northwestern. I think that's since been beat, but that was a great record at the time. It was astounding to look back at where he ranked as the national echelon of collegiate rushers his 4 years in college. As a freshman, he was second. He was 20th in his sophomore season. As a junior, he finished second again in the national rankings for football rushing, but in the final year of his college eligibility, he was the top first position on the list. In his 4 seasons as a Panther, he amassed 6,082 yards, setting an NCAA record at the time. In the Heisman Trophy voting, Tony was in the top 13 all 4 of his seasons with the Panthers, winning the coveted trophy in 1976. The College Football Hall of Fame proudly placed a display in honor of Tony Dorsett's legends in their museum in 1994. The Dallas Cowboys used some clever trades to work themselves into position to take Dorsett with the number 1 pick in the 1977 NFL Draft. And Tony repaid the franchise with a splendid career where he was a 4-time Pro Bowl selection and the 1981 first-team All-Pro. Dorsett helped the Cowboys emerge as a Super Bowl XII champions. His career rushing yards of 12,036 rushing yards and 72 rushing touchdowns are both second most in Cowboys history behind Emmitt Smith. Tony was the 1977 AP Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he spent 11 seasons in the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, and his final year was a member of the Denver Broncos. Tony Dorsett was one of the newly enshrined honorees at the 1994 Pro Football Hall of Fame ceremonies. So 1994 was a big year for Tony Dorsett. I mean, he got enshrined into both Hall of Fames, College Football Hall of Fame and the Pro Football Hall of Fame, both in 1994. What a great athlete, great football player, great rushing career in both the college and the pro game. Very memorable to watch him play. If you get to watch any old highlights of him, just outstanding, his speed and balance and grace and power. He was really exhibited being a great player from both college and pro ranks. April 7th, 1961, Crystal City, Texas. Gabe Rivera, the standout defensive tackle from Texas Tech, celebrated his arrival into the world. His bio on the NFF's website tells us that his nickname was Senor Sack, as Rivera averaged 80 tackles per season from his defensive tackle spot. He compiled 62 solo tackles, 43 assists, 10 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, and 25 quarterback pressures, and on 8 pass breakups during his All-American campaign of 1982 alone. Gabe was also on the honorable mention All-American list in both 1980 and 1981. The National Football Foundation selected Gabe Rivera for entrance into the College Football Hall of Fame in 2012. Gabe was taken with the 21st overall pick in the 1983 NFL Draft by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He played 6 games for Pittsburgh, but tragically had his career cut short when he was left as a paraplegic by injury suffered in a car accident midway through his rookie season. We are so thankful that you joined us once again for your Pigskin Daily History Dispatch podcast. We hope you'll join us back tomorrow. If you want to check out our blog posts and some of our other podcasts, you can go to pigskindispatch.com/podcast, or just go to pigskindispatch.com. You can also go to sportshistorynetwork.com to see this podcast and many other great podcasts on sports history, because it is the headquarters of sports yesteryear, sportshistorynetwork.com. So till tomorrow, everybody, have a great gridiron day. Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.